Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to our participants from all over the world and to our friends from the media community. First of all, allow me to introduce myself. I am Ria Otara of the Filipino Migrant Workers Union Hong Kong. I will be your facilitator in this event. Welcome to Migrante International press conference regarding the Duterte's regime's attacks on migrant rights advocates. We are having this event as a part of our celebration of the World Day of Migrants and Refugees. This is a response to the systematic disinformation and red tagging of the Philippine military, particularly the AFP, PNP, and MTFL-CAC, to Filipinos abroad, providing welfare assistance and services and advocating for the protection of the rights and well-being of the Filipino migrants and their families. Our participants in this press conference are leaders of migrant communities and providers of essential services to our kababayan. We'll be hearing their voices and concerns as victims of red tagging, as advocates of human rights in the Philippines, and as service providers of essential services to our kababayan at the first part of the program. And the second part is question and answer. And close to the end of the program, we will raise all our placards and do the chanting. Our first speaker is um, our first speaker is Angelica Lim from International Relations Officer Gabriela, USA.
Thank you very much, Rhea. My name is Angelica Lim, and I'll be offering a statement on behalf of Gabriela USA. We in Gabriela USA denounce the terror tagging and the doxing of our National Executive Committee members. A few weeks ago, photos of Gabriela USA's national leaders with our names and titles, along with labels tagging us as terrorists, were released and circulated on Facebook, shared by Lorraine Badoy, Undersecretary of the Presidential Communications Operations Office, and Facebook pages run by the Philippine military, including For the Global Public and Enlightened Youth. This act of labeling and terror tagging and false accusations endangers our lives and security for us as leaders and for our Gabriela organizations. In the last few months, there have been a surge of postings and sharings of memes, posters, and statements on social media such as Facebook, terror tagging members of progressive organizations, both in the Philippines, Europe, and the United States. These posts are used to spread fake news against human rights defenders and leaders of people's organizations who have been outspoken against Duterte's fascist regime and his abhorrent neglect of the Filipino people. The online attacks against organizations such as Gabriela USA comes at the heels of the continuous news of extrajudicial killings and heightened attacks. We are outraged but not surprised at this attack on Gabriela USA. We have been outspoken and consistent in efforts to expose Duterte's anti-terror law, which allows the regime's ongoing macho fascist attacks on women and the Filipino people. We trust the public to be more discerning and critical enough to know the main motive of the terror tagging by Duterte's administration is to silence us, but we will not be silent. Also, as Filipino women organizing in the United States for the Philippines, we must connect how the US continues to support the Duterte government. Since 2016, the United States has sent $550 million of aid to the Philippine military and police, not including arms sales. Despite well-publicized documentation of state-sanctioned and politically motivated killings, mass displacement of indigenous people due to aerial bombings and repression of press freedom, and the harassment of human rights defenders, the United States continues to provide aid to Duterte regime. The US plays a vital role in supporting the culture of violence and impunity and the direct vilifying of human rights defenders. Trump and Duterte work from the same playbook. Recently, in the United States, the Philippine Human Rights Act, or the PHRA, a bill initiated by the Malaya Movement and the International Coalition for Human Rights in the Philippines, US, and Kabataan Alliance, was introduced to Congress and is the people's response to the grave human rights situation in the Philippines. We in Gabriela call on organizations, individuals, community members to join us in supporting the the Philippine Human Rights Act and to suspend United States security assistance to the Philippines until such time as human rights violations by Philippine security forces cease and the responsible state forces are held accountable. Gabriela USA also urges everyone to join us to continue to fight for national democracy and genuine liberation of our homeland, the Philippines, to advance the women's movement and fight against the US Duterte regime's fascism and attacks on the Filipino people. Thank you for having us this evening.
Thank you, Angelica Lim of Gabriela USA, for giving us more picture about the state-sponsored PNP outpost in the U.S. Our next speaker is Ms. Rhonda Ramiro, chairperson. Our next speaker is Ms. Rhonda Ramiro.
Officials and the United Nations to recognize. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rhonda Ramiro. I'm the chairperson of Bayan USA, which is an overseas chapter of Bayan Philippines. On July 30, a Facebook page titled For the Global Public uploaded a photo of me and the other members of the Bayan USA Executive Committee labeling us as terrorists. We condemn this terror tagging and fake propaganda, which is a desperate attempt by the Duterte regime to discredit the growing overseas movement for genuine independence and democracy in the Philippines. We're not surprised by such moves, as the regime has long used platforms like Facebook to spread misinformation and fake news, using a paid troll army and suspicious Facebook pages to do its dirty work. In fact, Facebook recognized this when it took down several pages responsible for red tagging progressive organizations. Evidence shows that these pages were even operated by military personnel. These tactics are just one of the government's 2018 counterinsurgency program, Oplan Kapanatagan, which was further institutionalized by Executive Order 70 and more recently, the Anti-Terrorism Act of 2020. In the United States, we have felt the effects of counterinsurgency operations in several ways beyond red tagging on Facebook. In 2018, the government announced the establishment of the police liaison offices in the U.S. as part of its Global Police Community Relations program. To end life by labeling us as a communist terrorist group. We respect various forms of resistance that people take up. However, in the context of Duterte's tyrannical counterinsurgency program, red tagging or deliberate association of organizations and human rights defenders with armed revolutionaries have, many times over, led to state-sanctioned murder. These public attacks on our organizations are a response by a government backed into a corner, threatened by the people's unified and growing movement against Duterte's fascism and exploitation of the people. Despite the regime's attempts to vilify us, Bayan USA continues to strengthen and expand our movement for genuine freedom and democracy. The work of our mass movement, in alliance with U.S. unions and labor advocates, people of faith, human rights advocates, and many other Filipino organizations, has even influenced U.S. government officials and the United Nations to recognize the urgent human rights problem in the Philippines under the Duterte regime. We know that the Duterte regime's campaign to vilify Bayan USA and our members will only worsen as we continue to expose its fascism and to fight for the interests of the working and poor. As such, we demand that Facebook be more proactive in ending its complicity and de facto collusion with Duterte's fascist government by taking down posts that terror tag our members, as well as the pages that post them. While some pages have been taken down, the original page that labeled me as a terrorist is still active. The Duterte regime should not be given a platform to spread misinformation, harass our organizations, or endanger the safety and lives of our members. Our work to advance the interests of the most exploited and oppressed people in the Philippines and its diaspora makes it clear that Bayan USA is on the correct side of history. No amount of fake propaganda and terrorist tagging will ever silence us or make us back down. Activism is not terrorism. Junk the anti-terror law and oust Duterte now.
Thank you, Ms. Rhonda Ramiro, chairperson of Bayan USA. Now we will be hearing a solidarity message from our friend in the US. Friends, let us listen to Joe Losbaker from Stop FBI Repression, Chicago chapter.
Evening. My name is Joe Osbaker, and I'm with the Committee to Stop FBI Repression. I want to express my solidarity with the organizations of the National Democratic Movement of the Philippines in Europe, including Anak Bayan, Migrante, as well as my friend, Bishop Antonio Ablon of the Independent Church of the Philippines. They are facing repression in the form of red tagging. Red tagging is a very serious threat. In the Philippines, red tagging by the thugs of the Duterte regime have led to an untold number of deaths. We condemn it, and we condemn the Duterte regime for his human rights abuses, which are now far worse than the Marcos dictatorship of the 70s and 80s. What is the Committee to Stop FBI Repression? We are an organization that came together to defend a group of anti-war and international solidarity activists who were facing repression here. 10 years ago, my home and the homes of a number of other activists in the Midwest were raided by the FBI. They were investigating us for allegedly providing material support to so-called foreign terrorist organizations in Colombia and in Palestine, and they were investigating us for our support for the National Democratic Movement in the Philippines as well. Material support charges carry a minimum of 15 years in prison. The solidarity movement that emerged in our defense defeated those charges, and here we are today continuing our anti-war and international solidarity work. Our slogans at the time were opposing war is not a crime and international solidarity is not a crime. And what did the FBI want to ask us? They wanted to get us to name names of activists that we had met from Colombia and from Palestine. And we know in those countries, as in the Philippines, if you named those names, that those people could not just end up in prison, as we were facing, but they would also be facing torture and possibly death. And so we refused to even consider talking to the FBI or the grand jury. In 2016, I had the honor to go with a delegation with the Coalition for Human Rights in the Philippines to Western Mindanao, where I met Bishop Antonio Ablon and spent time in his church in Diplahan. And finally, I want to say that the U.S. military aid from the Trump regime makes it possible for Duterte, for his reign of terror, which is why we call for a complete cutoff of U.S. military aid, and why I am supporting the Philippine Human Rights Act that has been introduced into Congress. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe Losbaker from Stop FBI Repression, for your solidarity message. For our friends in the media community, we have those pre-recorded videos because of our time difference. Now, let's proceed. From the US, let us move to Europe. Have you heard about the EU Parliament resolution calling for an independent international investigation on Philippine human rights violations by the Duterte regime? Friends, let us welcome Bishop Antonio Ablon of Iglesia Filipina Independiente, who is currently based in Hamburg, Germany, and will give us more about the EU resolution.
Good morning, Europe. Good afternoon, Philippines. I am Bishop Antonio Ablon, and I am the current coordinator of the Europe Network for Justice and Peace in the Philippines, and also the Bishop Chaplain of Iglesia Filipina Independiente Europe Chaplaincy. So on September 17, the European Parliament has adopted a resolution. The resolution was calling for the Philippines, especially on trade, business and trade relations, to for its European Commission, to immediately initiate the procedure that could lead to the temporary withdrawal of the preferential trade benefits that the Philippines currently enjoys in trade with the European Union. At the same time, the EU Parliament called on the Philippine authorities to ensure human rights due diligence in all investment, development, and business projects, especially with regard to the large-scale agribusiness acquisitions, extractive industries, and infrastructure projects. It also called on companies based in or operating within the European Union to strictly comply with the United Nations guiding principles on business and human rights and observe human rights due diligence in all their business operations in the Philippines. And it also expressed deepest concern at the rapidly deteriorating human rights situation in the Philippines under the Duterte regime, and all, especially with all these killings that that is happening in the Philippines, including the red tagging of dissenters and activists, including human rights defenders, the Lumads and urban poor and workers and peasants. That was September 17. And on September 23, we have this Jeanette Angel Lopez, and when we check the account, it is supposed to be a domestic worker in Hong Kong, saying in the post that I am an online terrorist, representing NJPP and IFI Europe chaplaincy, and working as a terrorist. I'm not the only one being red tagged. I am also red tagged together with Marlon Laksamana, the Secretary General of Migrants Europe, and Fatima Sara Rico of Anakbayan Europe, who will be also speaking in this press conference. Yes, it came after the European Parliament resolution, and we think that this is a kind of a retaliation of the Duterte government. By the way, this is not the only reason, I think, because I was also together with the EQ Voice in the Philippines and Karapatan in the Philippines in last year, July of last year. I was also in Human Rights Council 41st session in Geneva, Switzerland, together with Karapatan sa Cristina Palabay and National Union People's Lawyers Edre Ulalia. We were then working advocacy work and lobbying work in the United Nations Human Rights Council. And that was my first time. And it was during the 41st session, and the Council, Human Rights Council, adopted the resolution sponsored by Iceland for, among others, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights to report or to render comprehensive report on Philippines' human rights situation, which was reported in the last 44th session of the Human Rights Council. And I believe that this recent red tagging to me and to the member organizations and mass organizations of Filipinos here in Europe is retaliatory attacks of the government of what we have been doing here in Europe, as we continue to fight for, not only for the welfare of migrants, but also we are also responding to the worsening situation of human rights, justice, and peace in the Philippines. But it should also be noted that this is not the first time for me to have been red tagged. In fact, the reason why I'm here in Europe now is the red tagging, maligning my person and my office as a bishop, including my church, when my name and the name of my church, together with the UCCP and others, are painted on the walls of our churches and retaining walls of the national highways in Western Mindanao, and also in some other parts of Mindanao have some leaflets red tagging me and pointing me as one of or one with the New People's Army, or to be a terrorist. But as a church leader, we are only doing the ministry, our pastoral and prophetic ministry to the people, especially the victims of human rights violations and the anti-people policies of the Duterte government. We are calling now to stop the attacks, not only of church people, but stop the attacks on the human rights defenders, opposition lawmakers, and any dissenters who only expressed their disagreement with this recent government. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bishop Blon. What are the actions taken by the migrant rights advocates in Europe? The answer we will hear from our next speaker, Ms. Fatima Sara Rico of Anak Bayan, Europa.
Thank you. Revolutionary greetings, everyone. Anak Bayan Europa, the most comprehensive mass organization of Filipino youth in Europe, has been labeled a terrorist yet again by the National Task Force to End Local Communist Armed Conflict. This isn't surprising since the attack started last May when Anak Bayan organized an online educational discussion with Professor Jose Maria Sison on the teachings of Lenin and its relevance in today's time. This attack was led by Presidential Communications Operations Office Undersecretary herself, Lorraine Badoy. The role of Anak Bayan Europa is to awaken the Filipino youth in Europe to the real conditions in the country and to know the true cause of forced migration. We also encourage the youth to be part of the struggle for genuine social change, so there will be no need to leave the country, so no family will ever be broken again. The Filipino youth fight because they love their hardworking parents who work for 12 hours a day, scrubbing away with bleach to put them through school. They fight because they know the difficulty of not knowing the language of the host country and the alienation it can bring. They fight because of the slave-like conditions Filipino migrants experience daily, just so they can send money to their families back in the Philippines. They fight because no matter how much their parents work, the cycle of migration will never break unless there are genuine agrarian reform and national industrialization. Instead of using government funds to terrorize people, the Duterte regime can instead use this to provide scientific, nationalist, and mass-oriented education and free healthcare, or more urgently, to solve the pandemic. Provide jobs so there will be no need to go abroad for economic opportunities. The red tagging of activists and organizations here is a clear attack on our democratic and academic rights. As a human rights student, I was merely using my studies to contribute to social change. As a resident in Europe, we have the right to believe in whatever we deem correct, the right to study whatever material we deem fit. Communist parties are illegal in Europe, are not illegal in Europe. In fact, a lot of left organizations are part of the participatory democracy. But in the Philippines, there is no distinction between national democratic organizations and communist parties because both are considered terrorist groups, because the semi-feudal and semi-colonial Philippine society creates fascists who are intolerant of dissent and criticism. The worsening political and economic and now health crisis in the country woke many generations of Filipinos, both inside and outside the country. The government evidently saw the gradual steering of the masses. That's why repressive tactics are much more violent and intense. Crisis generates resistance. The tagging of being an online terrorist is a big insult to us. Haven't they seen continuous mass mobilizations that Filipinos launch in Europe? We campaign for the legitimate demands of OFWs. When Filipinos are scavenging in France during the lockdown, did the Philippine government do anything? As far as we know, no one received financial aid here, while the government is occupied with hunting down activists and detaining them without arrest warrants. A menial amount of $200, and they still refuse to provide it. It's nothing compared to the cost of living here. Where is the 15 million pesos corrupted by top PhilHealth officials? Where is the 270 billion COVID response fund? We have the longest lockdown yet, and it won't be lifted anytime soon due to the inutility of the Philippine government. When the Duterte administration chose to dump dolomite in the Manila Bay instead of solving the health crisis, why wouldn't you be angry? The state is blatantly self-serving. It becomes our duty to fight. Our struggle will be victorious because there is an end to the oppression of the ruling class. When activists are killed ruthlessly every day, not only it is justified, it is the only way. We will continue to scream for justice, and our voices are evidently heard, for the Duterte administration is doing everything in its power to silence the people. We salute the OFWs who continue to work in slave-like conditions just to send remittances. We salute the comrades here tagged as terrorists because it shows how right our struggle is. When the state has zero respect for human rights, it's an honor to be called its enemy. To live to serve the people is the greatest honor. I will end this by a quote from Leanne Alejandro, a martial law martyr. The place of honor is in the line of fire. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fatima Sara Rico of Anakbayan, Europa. Friends, we will be hearing another message from a friend in Europe. Let us hear now Father Rudolph of Netherlands for his solidarity message. From a friend in Europe. Let us hear now Father Rudolph of Netherlands for his solidarity message.
Good morning, Europe, and good afternoon in the Philippines. It's just another time zone. I'm Father Rudolph from the Old Catholic Church in the Netherlands, and I'm living in a very small town in Egmond at the seaside. We had the opportunity to host Bishop Antonio Ablan for some times, and that's the reason why a kind of friendship came into being with him, but also in the time before with the Iglesia Filipina Independiente, which we have a bond of full communion with as all Catholic churches worldwide, and the Iglesia Filipina Independiente. It's a very important connection to us as a church, as a white church from Europe, with another church at another part of the world, to live in solidarity and to hear about the problems they experience and the problems we have. And it's a totally different world. But It's a world we unite. We are united together with because we believe in Christ and we share the faith, and the faith makes us to share our lives. And that's the reason why we also would say we like to stop the red tagging and the vilification of the people that struggle for it and have the danger for their own lives. It's a sign of our solidarity with the people from a different part of the world, but also as brothers and sisters in Christ, and not only from the churches, but from all the kind of organizations that struggle for life and justice. I will give a sign of peace. Last Sunday, not last Sunday, but the Sunday before, a pigeon walked into the church, and I made a picture of it because it took also a place in our garden, and he likes the food we give him. And we also read from the book of Jonah, what in Hebrew means pigeon. In Dutch, we say duif. And it was a sign of peace that people liked that this pigeon walked into the church, but also the sign of the Holy Spirit. And that's the strength us given to work for peace in the world, for solidarity, and for a safe place for every person to live. Thank you.
Thank you, Father Rudolph, for your solidarity message of support against red tagging and vilification.
Thank you.
Now, let's move on. Our next speaker is from Asia Pacific. Let us listen to Dolores Valladares Pelaez of United Filipinos in Hong Kong, and she will speak about the Philippine government's budget on military and NTF-LCAC activities.
Thank you, Rhea. Good day, everyone. I am Dolores Valladares Pelaez. I am the chairperson of the United Filipinos in Hong Kong. We are the chapter of Migrants International in Hong Kong. For 35 years, UNIFIL has been serving migrants and families. UNIFIL has led and participated in projects that ensure the welfare of fellow migrants. We have led campaigns with the aim to uphold migrants' rights. In a territory where we are treated as dispensable objects, we found comfort and strength in the community UNIFIL leads. This still rings true, especially now in this pandemic, where UNIFIL coordinated with partner organizations to spearhead the distribution of masks and sanitizers to migrants who are unable to buy their own, while campaigning that migrant workers be included in the city's health measures for COVID-19 and government financial aid and assistance. Yet, we are attacked even with our track record of service and integrity. A year ago, leaders of the Emilio Aguinaldo, Duterte diehard Hong Kong, specifically Jeanette Lopez, started intensifying their attacks after we openly criticized President Duterte due to his broken promises to migrant workers, like not canceling the Overseas Employment Certificate or OEC and enough jobs for overseas Filipinos back home as he promised. They then put up banners of support for Duterte in our places of communication. These leaders who are acting in behalf of the National Task Force to End Local Communist Armed Conflict or NTF-LCAC have consistently made inflammatory comments against us. They distributed pamphlets vilifying organizations like Bayan, Migrante, and Gabriela, among others. They continued to terror tag us and even became more aggressive as they took photos and videos of us, then added malicious texts like we are collecting money for the CPP and PA. They also made blogs and posted this in their Facebook pages and on YouTube. In one of their social media posting, they even threatened to deport us and to harm our families. Recently, as our campaign against the mandatory PhilHealth premium increase intensified, So did the malicious attacks and terror tagging by the Emilio Aguinaldo DDS group. They even said that we are spreading fake news while saying that PhilHealth premium increase is okay as long as it's compulsory, not mandatory. During one of our programs in Chater Road where we usually convene during Sundays, one of the leaders of the Emilio Aguinaldo DDS even tried to disrupt our program by walking directly into our program area and wave a banner accusing our organizations and affiliate groups as CPP-NPA allied terrorist organizations. It intensified again when the campaign to oppose the anti-terrorism law is gaining ground. It's not only happening in Hong Kong. In Thailand, the NTF-ELCAC is planning to organize an activity there because according to them, there are members of the New People's Army there. But actually, these people they call NPA are migrant workers whose livelihood have been affected by the pandemic, seeking aid and assistance from the Philippine government. In Taiwan, our Department of Labor and Employment and the Manila Economic and Cultural Office or MECO threatened our kababayan Lindsay Lawan, a caregiver there, to be deported because she criticized Duterte in her Facebook for not helping Filipinos and not giving aid to OFWs and their families. With an increase of 3,000% of NTF-ELCAC's proposed budget in 2021 from 622.3 million pesos in 2020 to 19.1 billion pesos in 2021, they have more money to vilify Filipino citizens overseas. This is where our taxes go. Instead of allotting this money to help people affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, they put the budget to NTF-ELCAC. We know why they are doing this. They are protecting their health savior, Duterte, from the people's wrath because of his incompetence in responding to disasters and closeness to the people's plight. So they slander us, hoping that people will believe their lies. They want Duterte to save face due to his unfulfilled promises and making the lives of many Filipinos more miserable and for continuing to make milking cows out of migrant workers when he signed the Universal Healthcare Law, giving PhilHealth more power to collect more money from mandatory PhilHealth membership and premium hike. But we will persevere. We and the people will hold Lopez and other leaders of the Emilio Aguinaldo, DDS, NTF-ELCAC, and the Duterte accountable. History will judge these entities as unfortunate blemishes on the face of Philippine society. Tuloy ang laban, makibaka, huwag matakot. Stop the attacks, stop the terror attacks on migrant workers, junk terror law, oust Duterte now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dolores Valladares Pilaes, for your brave and comprehensive presentation that shows how NTF-ELCAC red tag and harass the migrant activists here in Hong Kong and Asia Pacific. Our next speaker is Pastor Berlin Guerrero, chairperson of Bayan Australia. He will speak more about the experiences of red tagging by Philippine military in Australia.
Hello, good morning, Europe, and good afternoon, Philippines and Asia. I am Berlin Guerrero, an ordained minister of the Uniting Church in Australia and chairman of Bayan Australia. I came to Australia 8 years ago as an asylum seeker following my abduction, torture, and incarceration for 1 year, 3 months and 15 days under the Arroyo administration, who is now an ally of the Duterte administration. In the period of end of January and early February this year, no less than Philippine Army Lieutenant General Antonio Parlade, head of the NTF-LCAC, and also Presidential Communications Operations Office Undersecretary Lorraine Badoy arrived in Australia and conducted so-called peace forums in Sydney and in Melbourne. I was able to attend the forum in Melbourne on 4 February 2020, hosted by a Filipino organization and the Philippine Consulate. To my surprise, his presentation was not about how to achieve just and lasting peace in the Philippines, but about the counterinsurgency program of the government, which unduly vilify and malign legitimate people's organizations in the Philippines, in Australia, and in other parts of the world. The Army General went to the extent of red tagging Australian nationals and falsely and dangerously linking them to so-called communist terrorists in the Philippines. These organizations include Migrante, Gabriela, and Akbayan, calling them CTGs or communist terrorist groups. He named Mr. Len Cooper, newly elected chairperson of the ILPS, lawyer Jill Boringer, member of the International Association of People's Lawyers, Peter Murphy, chairperson of ICHIRP, and former missionary to the Philippines, Sister Patricia Fox. All these persons mentioned are advocates of human rights in the Philippines, both in the Philippines and in the international forums. Duterte supporters are also active in cyberbullying, red tagging, and vilifying Bayan and its member organizations, which were collecting and distributing relief goods and foodstuffs for international students and temporary migrants who were left behind in the government support schemes and neglected by the Duterte administration. There are also attacks made on a New Zealander who expressed solidarity for the Filipino campaign to stop the killings. His car was vandalized after giving a solidarity message. On the occasion of the 48th year of the declaration of martial law 1 week ago, Bayan Australia urgently called and formally called on the Australian government to raise its urgent concern over gross violations of human rights and political killings under Duterte administration. Furthermore, Bayan called the Australian government to withdraw all political, economic, and military support with the Philippine government in order to hold Duterte and his administration accountable for the worsening human rights situation in the country. So we call on the people of the world and the people of the Philippines to unite and hold the Duterte government accountable for gross violations of human rights and in its tyrannical and dictatorial rule. Magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat.
Thank you, Pastor Berlin Guerrero of Bayan, Australia. Friends, now let us hear a solidarity message of support against red tagging and vilification from Sister Patricia Fox, spokesperson of the International Coalition of Human Rights in the Philippines, Asia Pacific.
Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. Thank you for this invitation to offer solidarity on behalf of the Asia Pacific Coalition for Human Rights. As everybody's mentioned and Berlin mentioned, the red tagging that's been going on, we've seen what's happened in the Philippines. Those red tagged, if they haven't been arrested, they've been killed. They've been every effort to silence them, and the same we've seen is happening internationally. And I know my experience with the groups here, with Migrante, Gabriela, Nakbayan, have all been in support of the Filipino people here. Migrante has been instrumental in helping the workers. Gabriela has taken up many issues in terms of domestic violence that happens a lot here, in terms of raising consciousness, and of course, Nakbayan among the students. And as Berlin said, this role has been even more taxing during the period of the pandemic, when the Australian government virtually wiped its hands of all people who are not permanent residents or citizens of Australia. And they've been making heroic efforts to provide support, whether it's moral, financial, food support. So the whole red tagging is just so disgusting, but it also shows a desperation that people are rising up. People are rising up in the Philippines. Filipinos are rising up around the world. And we in the Solidarity Movement are standing beside the Filipinos, calling for an end to these vilification, and into the red tagging, and into the killings. And we particularly raise our voice even louder with the Anti-Terrorist Act. And although I was one of those who was red tagged, it doesn't attack me, but for Filipinos overseas who should dare to use their right as people to condemn brutality, to condemn injustice. This Anti-Terrorism Act reaches out even as far as here or wherever that they are. So we stand in support of the Filipinos as they struggle for justice, freedom, and genuine democracy. Long live the international solidarity, and long live the efforts of Filipinos abroad to bring justice and peace to their own home country. Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Patricia Fox. We're down to our last speaker. May I remind everyone, especially to our media friends, to please prepare your questions, because right after our next speaker's message, we will have a half an hour question and answer. Now let us call on Joanna Concepcion, Chairperson of Migrante International.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon from the Philippines, and good afternoon to all our friends who are watching. We welcome today the efforts of Facebook last week to remove 57 fake Facebook accounts, 31 has revealed to the Filipino people clear evidence of state-sponsored and funded online attacks, red tagging, and mass deception. The AFP and the Philippine National Police have deliberately tried to hide their identities and their ties to these fake accounts, but they were not successful. We know that this proves that this is a coordinated and deliberate effort by the Duterte government to mislead people and attack progressive organizations and individuals who are raising legitimate criticisms of its anti-people, anti-migrant policies, and the widespread human rights violations in the Philippines. The congressional budget hearings for the National Budget 2021 is currently ongoing, and the people's taxpayers' money should not be used to fund these online funding for spreading terror and lies, both in the Philippines and overseas. Filipino migrant workers all over the world have been severely affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. More than 10,000 have already been infected, a significant number of whom are Filipino migrant worker frontliners. 700 plus have died, and more than 1 million have been displaced, and lost their livelihood. Only 200,000 plus have received one-time financial assistance from the Philippine government. Thousands more remain stranded food, clean water, adequate shelter, health supplies, and urgent medical attention. These are the pressing issues our organizations overseas have been effectively raising. The criminal neglect of the Duterte government in providing immediate assistance and support to millions of our Filipino migrant workers. And yet, the Philippine government has prioritized passing an anti-terror law, implementing martial rule, a militarized response in the country, instead of a medical and health-centered one, spending money to use social media as a weapon to attack its people. Today, we are launching a public unity statement signed by various Filipino organizations overseas and support organizations calling on the Duterte government to stop its terror tagging of migrant rights activists and advocates. I would like to read this brief unity statement. We demand an immediate stop to the tagging of activists and progressive organizations globally as quote-unquote communist terrorist groups by the administration of Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte. Progressive migrant-serving and human rights organizations and their leaders, including Migrante International, United Filipinos in Hong Kong, Bayan Hong Kong Macau, Gabriela Hong Kong, Migrante Aotearoa, Migrante Australia, Anakbayan Europe, Gabriela USA, and Bayan USA have been the victims of such terror tagging as the an overseas Filipino worker in Taiwan and are carried out through government official Facebook pages, such as that of Lorraine Badoy, the Undersecretary of the Presidential Communications Operations Office and spokesperson of the National Task Force to End Local are also used to spread false information and black propaganda. Terror tagging or red tagging is a dangerous tactic used by fascist governments throughout the world in an attempt to discredit individuals and organizations that express critical views. In the Philippines, red tagging is used to justify harassment, arrests, and assassinations by state forces and its armed goons. Jory Porquia, a former Migrante International organizer abroad and coordinator in Iloilo City, was killed inside his home after a long series of red tagging. Zara Alvarez, a human rights worker who was placed on a government terror list in 2018, was recently murdered this August. Similarly, Brandon Lee, an environmental activist in a Cordillera who survived an assassination attempt by state agents in 2019, was vilified by the Philippine military for years prior. With Duterte's anti-terror law now in effect, we can only expect more brazen attacks. As human rights abuses and poverty continue to worsen under the Duterte administration, it is important that Filipinos and their allies overseas continue to raise their voices against tyranny. We understand that this commitment to justice will only elicit further contempt from the Duterte administration. Despite this, we affirm our commitment to supporting and defending the necessary work fighting for genuine change in the Philippines. Today, our demands are: 1, to junk the anti-terror law; 2, the shutdown of the sources of Facebook news, posts, and accounts; 3, to abolish completely the National Task Force to end local communist armed conflict; 4, to support the United Nations Human Rights Council and the EU the welfare of Filipino migrants in this time of the pandemic. Stop the attacks, junk terror law. We are Filipino migrants, not terrorists. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanna Concepcion of Migrante International. Friends, we are now open to questions. Please state your name and media outfit before the question and for whom the question is addressed to. Thank you. You can now unmute if you want to raise questions to our speakers.
Hi, can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
This is Marianne Benitez from Hong Kong Standard. When you say, it's red tagging everything, right? But I want to know, why are you being red tagged? And the other thing is, what do you mean by oust Duterte? We've got this duly elected president. The Philippines cannot afford another people power. So why is it that you're calling for oust Duterte? Especially in this pandemic, there's no way that people will respond to your call for ousting Duterte. He's the leader, supposedly. We have to respect that. The voters, voted for him in 2016, and he's got how many more years? 2 more years to go, right? But there are also some questions as to whether, Duterte said, apparently there are reports from the Philippines, and I want to confirm this with other reporters, in this Zoom meeting, whether it's true or not that he's considering whether to postpone the national elections in 2022, which would mean, that his tenure might be extended, which is also not, within our constitution, unless he's looking for federalization or charter change. So what's the scenario now? Shouldn't the Philippines or groups like you, work within the law, within the constitution, and see what we can do, to change the government or whatever? Because I'm not sure what your option is or what sort of alternative you're offering to the Filipinos. Is it a systemic change, a system of, an upheaval of government, which I don't think, majority of Filipinos would like. Thank you.
May I respond to that first?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Hello. Thank you for the question, and I would like to respond first on working within the law and the Constitution. Yes, we are working within the law and we are working within the Constitution, because the Constitution provides for our voices to be heard, and it is provided in the Constitution. That is the freedom of speech, and any Filipino can call for ouster and can critique a president, not to be submitted only to the will of the president. That's the first that I know many others can talk about that. And also, the calling for ouster of Duterte is a sign that we are no longer satisfied with his administration. And we do not call ouster because it will win. We call ouster because of our dissatisfaction. And this is not a game of winning or losing. This is expressing our dissatisfaction of the president's what is this how he ran the government. And yes, so, third is that we are being red tagged. I am being red tagged as I have been presenting, because I have been working with the member oppressed people in the Philippines while I was in the Philippines. Also here, when I already get my exile period in Europe, I have been working, advocating and lobbying in the Human Rights Council in Geneva of the United Nations. And I believe that this is an attack of the government to the dissenters like me, who have been telling all the people that I see and forum that what is happening in the Philippines, which is my right, and that is provided for in the Constitution of the Philippines. To me, to help, as you said, to the government is not to always follow what the government is saying. To help the government is to critique its anti-people policy. Thank you.
Um, thank you, Miss Marian, for your question, and thank you, Bishop Ablon. Anyone from the speakers who wants to add some more answer or
Can I add some more to what
yes,
Bishop Ablon
please?
said? This is Dolores from Hong Kong. On the issue of why we are red tag or terror tag by the NTF-ELCAC and the supporters of Duterte, as I've said in my message a while ago, UNIFIL has been in Hong Kong for 35 years, and we've been doing work, welfare work to our kababayans, our families, and even other workers of other nationalities, because we believe that we have to help each other and strengthen our unities, because our governments are not doing its responsibility and giving, protection to its people while we are in the Philippines and while we are overseas. And then from what we are doing and what we are seeing from the Duterte government at the moment, we are very vocal in criticizing on his programs, projects, and his promises, while we are asking for the votes of the people, that he's going to improve the lives and livelihood of Filipino people. But what we are experiencing and looking or what we are seeing right now is that nothing has changed. It became worse, and with that we are very vocal in criticizing the Duterte government, and because of that, we think that his group and their government are using this criticism to silence us, and actually to cover up or to protect the Duterte government for his incompetence, for not fulfilling his promises and giving true services to the Filipino people.
Thank you, Dolores Valladares Pelaez.
I'd like
Are
to
there-
add, I think, two points to the response.
Yes, please.
Um,
Go, Pastor.
yes, Marianne said that, ask actually as if we are for systems change. And definitely, yes, our organizations have been fighting for systems change since we were organized. And this means that what needs to happen in the Philippines is change in all aspects of its life, from economic to political to social and cultural. Um, and also, you mentioned that we cannot afford another EDSA type of movement or uprising. Um, it is always the option of the people to find ways by which this systematic change can be had. And one is through elections, one is through participating in the parliament, and of course, also by making use of the parliaments of the streets, which is actually what EDSA 1 and 2 were. Because now the opportunities for free speech, for example, and for freedom of movement is being hampered by the terror tagging and by terrorist anti-terror law, and even making use of the quarantines and lockdowns to suppress the movements of the people, it becomes always an option for the people to find other means of uh, seeking systematic change or systems change. But at the moment, you also mentioned that are there options for a constitutional way to change things? Yes, there is. We believe that there should be succession based on what the Constitution prescribes, which is if the president is not able to govern, therefore it is the vice president who can step in as provided for in the Constitution. But the question really is, will the Duterte government give way to constitutional change? It seems that is not the trend. The trend is more militarization, more restrictions, and even the extension of the lockdown. Maybe it is providing for the lengthening of President Duterte's rule. What happens after the extension of 1 year? Will there be another 1 year extension? And then it's already 2022, which is election time. So will there be truly free and honest elections in 2022, if ever there will be? So that is how we are looking at the scenarios. And thank you very much for your question.
Thank you, Pastor.
Thank you.
Are there more questions from our media friends? Please,
Rhea,
yes.
hi, may I add?
Who is this, please? Oh, Joanna. Okay, Joanna, go ahead, please.
Dagdag lang to Bishop Adlon's answer, no? Just to state and a reminder, no, of the 1987 Constitution, no? It states that sovereignty resides in the people and all government authority emanates from them, no? So the Duterte government has been trampling on the law, the Constitution, no? Philippine Constitution, and the passage of anti-terror law is an example of this, and it has been challenged. No, more than 30 petitions have been filed in the Supreme Court questioning the constitutionality of the anti-terror law. No, so this is and this was passed, in the middle of a pandemic, when the Philippine government should be attending, to the economic and health crisis. The Philippines now has one of the longest lockdowns, in Southeast Asia. So that already signals crisis, and the fact that the state of calamity have been extended until September of next year. So you can see now the response the response of the Duterte government in addressing this crisis has been a failure if it had to extend the state of calamity in the country for a year. Now, with regards to the elections, the pandemic should not be used to suppress democratic rights of the Filipino people, most especially our right to vote, no? And the our right to vote should not be suppressed during this time, and this would not benefit the Filipino people. The Philippine government should ensure develop plans how to have a safe and healthy process of elections even during the time of a pandemic. So it would not benefit the Filipino people if we were not if our right to exercise, our right to vote, would be suppressed, and this would be dangerous. No, a dangerous path. It could lead to dictatorship. So we are very concerned that we will stand up against the suppression and the postponement of the national elections.
Thank you, Joanna Concepcion. And may we ask for more questions? Are there more questions from the media friends? Please, you can unmute your microphone and please state your name and your media outfit before your question. Is there a message from the chat box?
There is a message in the chat box.
Yeah, there is.
Asking what is our thoughts about President Duterte's praying every night to find the vaccine.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, Pastor. Anyone from the speakers?
Everyone's praying to have the vaccine anyway. And I'm sure the clergy in this press conference have been doing that ever since the pandemic. What is more important, I think, is that there should be a sincere response to the pandemic and its effect. Meaning, for the sake of the Philippines, the response should be more of health and medical approach rather than police or military approach. And we're also praying that the pandemic should not be used to steal money from the coffers of the government or to divert health funds into the needs of the military or for the coming elections. So I'm sure a lot of people are praying comprehensively, not only to find the vaccine, but also to find solutions to the systemic problems we have in the Philippines, mainly the semi-colonial, semi-feudal situation or arrangement in the Philippines.
Okay, thank you, Pastor, for your response. Anyone from our speakers? Before we proceed to our photo op and chanting.
Rhea?
Yes, Bishop Ablon.
Yeah, I cannot describe how the president using some religious acts just to convey or to deceive the Filipinos. But I think this is a kind of a loser's statement, but wanting to escape from his responsibility to the kapalpakan of the administration's fight against the pandemic. This is from pasaway to the vaccine. It is a kind of, the president is kind of saying, we cannot win the fight because the Filipinos are pasaway. And now he is saying we cannot solve the problem of the pandemic unless there is a vaccine. It's a kind of palusot of the president to the failures of his administration in handling the fight against COVID-19. Filipinos should not be deceived by this, especially coming from the president using prayer, kono. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. I
Last na
think,
lang.
okay,
Last na lang.
okay, please, Joanna, go ahead.
So sa response sa question, no, our organizations have demanded actually for a comprehensive response to the COVID-19 pandemic since day one. No, but the response, ano yung response ng Philippine government is militarized approach, no, militarism at band-aid solutions. The long lockdown, implementation of lockdown ay hindi na dapat kinailangan kung natugunan early on, no, nag-implement na ng policies, no, to respond to the pandemic, no, but it has allowed entry, no, of individuals from outside, no, of the country. So it could have shut down borders. It could have many health organizations have had proposals, no. But in other countries like New Zealand, Uruguay, tsaka Vietnam, hindi na sila nag-antay ng vaccine, no? They manage the public health situation in their country by what? By allowing medical and health and scientific experts to lead their COVID-19 pandemic response in their countries. Pero sino ang namumuno sa ating task force to fight COVID? Mga militar. So you can see that hindi nagkulang ang mamamayang Pilipino, no, in the Philippines and overseas to propose and even our health sector, our health professionals have submitted, no, proposals of how what to prioritize, no. The calling for mass testing is one, and yet the petition, no, in the Supreme Court filed by organizations and individuals to pressure na the Philippine government to conduct mass-wide testing in the country has been rejected. No, so you can see na we have had proposals, no, since day one for a comprehensive plan, and we need more than prayers. We need urgent action at this time.
Okay, thank you very much, Joanna Concepcion of Migrante International. I think that is our last.
Rhea.
Oh,
Hi.
hi.
It's Lila from News 5.
Oh, hi,
Before you all
Laila.
proceed to your, yes, good afternoon. Before you all proceed to your photo op, I just want to ask one last question, and this is addressed to Sister Patricia. She's still here. Good afternoon, Sister Patricia. How are you doing? Kamusta ka na dyan? And are we still fighting for the plight of the Filipinos kahit wala ka po dito sa Pilipinas?
Hey, good afternoon. Yes, I'm still here, and yes, I am still fighting because I have so many friends in the Philippines that I still feel very close to, and still feel very close to the Filipino people. And when I see the attacks, of course, it makes me want to do more in terms of solidarity work. And then on the Filipinos here, you know, with the red tagging, with the social media, and I see how hard they work for the Filipinos here as well as for the Filipinos abroad. So yes, I'm still doing whatever I can and hoping one day I can go back.
Thank you so much, sister.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sister Patricia Fox and Laila Chicadora. I think that will be the last part of our Q&A, question and answer segment. I mean the second part. May I ask all the speakers and the participants here to please, you can turn on your camera now. And if you have your placards, please get your placards ready, or we will be having a photo op and screen capture with our adjut using with our slogan, Junk Terror Law, shut down source of FB fake news, abolish NTF-LCAC, zero budget to NTF-LCAC, support international calls to investigate Duterte's human rights violations, trabaho, ayuda, at serbisyo para sa mga migranteng Pilipino. I have my placard ready as well. Stop the killings in the Philippines. Okay. Okay. Junk terror law.
Junk terror law.
Shut down source of FB fake news.
Shut down source of FB fake news.
Abolish NTF-LCAC.
Abolish
Abolish
NTF.
NTF-LCAC.
Zero budget to NTF-LCAC.
Zero budget.
Support international calls to investigate Duterte's human rights violations.
Support the international call to investigate Duterte's human rights violations.
Trabaho, ayuda, at serbisyo para sa mga migranteng Pilipino.
Trabaho,
ayuda, serbisyo para sa mga migranteng Pilipino.
Stop the killings in the Philippines.
Stop
the killings in the Philippines.
Just stay and raise your placard. You will do the screen capture. Gone. Okay. That is okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you to all the media and to our speakers. We don't want to say goodbye, but we are now ending our press conference. But we will let our speakers to remain online for a few minutes for more minutes in case some media friends would like to ask some more questions to our speakers.
Thank you, Rhea.
Thank you, Rhea.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to all.
Thank you, Rhea. Hello, Pastor Berlin.
Hello, Pastor. Kamusta ka, Bishop?
Okay lang. Thank you, Rudolph.
Magkwentuhan tayo minsan, Bishop.
Yes, we will.
Thank you, Rudolph.
Goodbye,
Thank
Berlin.
you, Dala. Joanna, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Angelica.
much.
Oh,
And
thank
all,
you.
thank you.
Thank you, Sister Pat.
Sister Pat, thank you very much. And yeah.
Ayun.